All right, our top focus, of course, Israel, as we mentioned earlier, has urged the White House to reschedule a high-level meeting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had earlier cancelled.
And of course, that cancellation happened after the US did not veto the UNSC's Gaza ceasefire resolution. And of course, that left Benjamin Netanyahu quite miffed. In a bid to ease tensions now between the two allies, a White House confirmed that Netanyahu's office has now agreed to reschedule that meeting, which was earlier cancelled, dedicated to discuss the Israeli military's plans for the onslaught of Israel on the southern city of Rafah.
Reports claim Netanyahu is planning to send a delegation as early as next week. This after the United States allowed passage of a Gaza ceasefire resolution. Netanyahu had called off a planned visit, as Shivan just mentioned, to Washington by a senior Israeli delegation. The suspension of the meeting, it forced the United States to face a new obstacle as Washington tries to get Netanyahu to consider alternatives to a ground invasion of Rafah.
What we have said is the kind of mission that we could support is a much more targeted, limited campaign that could still achieve the same objectives, that could still lead to the defeat of those remaining Hamas battalions inside Rafah, but without massive harm to the civilian population, without hindering the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and without actually weakening Israel's security instead of strengthening it.
Meanwhile, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham called on the Biden administration to allow Israel to work to destroy Hamas in Rafah. Recently, Republican Senator from South Carolina who was on a visit to Israel said this.
The 4 battalions that still reside in the Rafah region must be destroyed. That is non-negotiable. One thing I've learned from talking to the Israeli Defense Forces is if these battalions are left intact, everything they've achieved will be lost over time. So I urge the Biden administration, the Congress, to make sure that Israel has the time and space to achieve victory over Hamas militarily.
Earlier this week, Israeli Minister Yoav Gallant held several discussions with senior U.S. officials. His threat of Rafah ground operations have increased differences between the United States and Israel. While meeting his Israeli counterpart, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also said civilian casualties in Gaza are too high. It also raised questions whether the United States is going to restrict military aid if Netanyahu decides to move on with the Rafah invasion.
As the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to worsen, Ireland says it will intervene in South Africa's genocide case against Israel.
Foreign Minister Michael Martin said that on the October 7th attack and the Gaza crisis, it represents the blatant violation of international humanitarian law on a mass scale. Meanwhile, in the Red Sea, U.S. forces destroyed 4 long-range unmanned aerial systems that were launched by Houthi rebels. According to U.S. Central Command, the 4 drones were aimed at a U.S. warship. Now for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York with all the other details with regards to this. Let's listen to this.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now planning to send 2 officials to Washington for talks on the possible military operation in Rafah, reversing his previous decision to cancel the trip. The trip initially was canceled due to disagreements over a United Nations Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. U.S. and Israeli officials now say that they have agreed to reschedule that meeting, which is considered to be quote-unquote urgent. The news comes as we're hearing that negotiations have once again fallen through regarding hostages. The State Department spokesperson, however, on Wednesday said that the most difficult issues involved in the hostage negotiations are yet to be resolved, but talks are not believed to have come to an end. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.